Good afternoon, everyone. I have a piece of news for you. Y'all done made a mistake and let me on the stage. I am so excited to be here, and we're going to have a good conversation. I want to know who in here is a bookworm? Raise your hand. This is great. Of course you guys are bookworms. You don't come to a TED Talk, right, if you don't like words. I'm a bookworm too. I love books. I love to read. I love to learn. I love the experience of taking in something that I didn't create. I love books so much that I have what I like to call Teresses Times bestseller list. You know, like the New York, y'all get it. So on the top of that list is a book that's one of my favorite. And it's critical to our conversation today. The book is called The Other Wes Moore. The Other Wes Moore is a true, gripping, almost unbelievable story about two boys, both of them named Wes Moore. Both boys grew up in similar Baltimore neighborhoods. They both grew up impoverished. They both grew up without fathers in their home. And they both had run-ins with the police several times throughout their adolescence. So because the boys had such similar childhoods, then it begs this question, which is, what is the difference between two kids and the outcomes that they have? Because one of the Wes Moores went on to be a White House Fellow, a Rhodes Scholar, a decorated veteran, and an influential business leader in our country. The other, Wes Moore, he ended up being a convicted murderer. And he's spending the rest of his life in prison until the day he dies. What was the difference between those two boys? And most importantly, what we're here to talk about today, what I'm here to chat with you about a little bit, is what is the difference between any two children who experience adverse circumstances and experiences, but they go on to have drastically different outcomes as adults. The answer to this question is both widely known, and it's also simultaneously our best kept secret. The answer to this question, if we take it with the weight in which it's given, will absolutely revolutionize childhood and probably even humanity. The quest to answer this question took me on a personal 15-year journey of what's called narrative research. I have worked with literally thousands of youth and their families, analyzing stories and outcomes. And I've been in different positions. I've worked as a school social worker in an educational setting. I've worked in communities as an executive director for a nonprofit. I've worked as a licensed therapist in residential treatment all across the country. And probably my proudest role is I've worked, and it is work, as a mommy of 4 of my own kids. Why does that matter? Because in all of those roles, the answer to that question did not change. It didn't matter what role I was functioning in. The answer came down to this one simple thing. Now, does anyone, besides my poor family who's had to hear this talk probably 10 times already, does anyone in here know the answer? A little louder. Oh, influential people. What else? I heard something else.
The family dynamic.
The family dynamic. What else? Resilience. Somebody stole my answer. The answer is resilience. Now, family dynamics and all of those things, we're going to talk about that in a second. All of those things impact the outcomes of children. We know this. But resilience is, through the research, through my own research, The number one skill, the characteristic that we want children to have. Why? The American Psychological Association defines resilience, because we have to understand what we're talking about, right? They define resilience as the ability to overcome adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, and even significant sources of stress. So when we hear that definition, I hope that it pops into your mind that we all need to be, and we've all had to be, resilient, right? Because who in here can say, I have not experienced any type of adversity, trauma, tragedy, no threats, or significant source of stress? There's not one person in here that can say that. So if that is the case, if we understand that adversity is guaranteed, and we understand that it is guaranteed that we need resilience, then why is it that we don't teach resilience to our kids? I am here to propose something that seems maybe a little radical, but not really. That we teach kids resilience from the beginning. What we do as a society is we teach kids resilience as a response to something negative that has happened. That is when we start the conversation about being resilient and they can get through it and all of those wonderful things. What I'm saying is that we as the adults in the lives of kids, we need to teach them resilience as fervently as we teach math, science, sports, art, whatever it is. Maybe not math, okay? Of course, a huge stuff. Or we teach you this art. But whatever it is that you feel passionately about, that you want kids to have, we need to teach resilience with that much fervor. Why? Because we're giving kids what they need and preparing them for the part of life that we know is inevitable, right? Now, you guys mentioned families, and I'm glad that you threw that out there, because I want to tell you that in my almost 2 decades of research, I've wanted to know the answer. Okay, kids need resilience. How do we do that? How do you do that? How do I build resilience in a child? The research has pointed to, again, one solid answer. Not 10, although I can name 10 things that impact kids. One solid answer. And that answer is through relationship. Not surprisingly, a study that was published in the International Journal for Child and Youth Outcomes studied 445 kids who were not exposed to adverse childhood experiences. Okay? They studied those kids and the outcomes that they had as adults over a 15 to 20 year span. And what this study found is that those kids and their life outcomes were greatly predicted by the relationships that they had. And that those relationships impacted kids in a greater way than any other variable. So what's the common everyday interpretation of that? It didn't matter how smart they were, how much money their parents had, what the background was. All of those things do definitely have an impact, absolutely. But the thing that was most impactful, the thing that makes the difference between the two Westmores, if you will, is the quality of relationships that those children have. And whether those relationships built resilience in them. Now, the other piece of this is, who's going to do it? We have this ambiguous term out there, build relationships in kids. Whose responsibility is it? I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. In my work, there is no place where I have more profoundly seen this idea of building resilience in kids through relationships, more profoundly played out than actually in the educational setting. Why? Well, our school system as an institution, it's the only organization and institution that has access to kids on a regular, continual basis. And some of you might say, well, maybe not so much recently. right? But we're getting back there. The educational institution is the only system that can say we will impact, we will come in contact with large numbers of students, and we can impact them, train them, and teach them, and give them something that will impact their lives for years to come. If someone were to ask you if there's someone influential in your life or somewhere where you're greatly impacted or maybe even negatively impacted, I can almost guarantee you that about 90% of you all will say something about school or someone in your school. Now, I don't disagree for those of you who are thinking it is my job as a parent, it is our job as a family to build resilience in our kids. I agree 150%. But I can tell you after working for years with families right here in our own backyard, that families are toxically stressed right now. They are overworked, under-resourced financially and mentally. They are disconnected, and families are telling me that they feel ill-equipped to meet the very basic social and emotional needs of their students. And there's no judgment with that. It's just the reality of where some families are. So instead of us leaving it to the system to build the resilience, why don't we collaborate? Why don't we implement resilience building in the school setting and connect all the systems together? Because in the end, the impact will outweigh any work that needs to be done. Now, if you're not an educator in here, I don't want you to think that this message does not apply to you. If you are a parent, if you are an aunt, if you are an uncle, a community leader, an organizational leader, an extended friend, by blood, or it doesn't matter. If you have access to a child, no matter for how long, then you have the greatest opportunity to make a difference in their lives by being a caring adult. Whether you cared for a day or in a moment, or whether you are there for them to care for a lifetime. Having that impact and having that voice and being a caring adult for kids not only builds resilience in them, but it develops what we call a strong inner voice. Just before I came out here, my inner voice was like, Teresse, you got this, right? You can do this. You do this all the time. Kids have an inner voice too. But what we don't realize is that their inner voice is not developed by them. It's developed by the people who are around them. So the messaging that they receive is the message that they repeat to themselves. They don't come tell you tell me this, and I just said it to myself in this situation. Nope, we don't get that opportunity to hear that and to know that. But I'm telling you as a professional that tape plays over and over and over in their head. Mrs. Lewis said, I can do X, Y, and Z. Mrs. Lewis said, focus on what I can control. I want you to take a moment and imagine a child hearing your voice and your message in their head and how that might impact them when they are facing a situation that you are not able to stand by their side and help them to overcome. What would our world look like? Imagine with me. If our organizations, our homes, our schools were resilience building centers where kids could go and get filled up when they need to. Almost like a gas station. They're everywhere, right? Kids can go and feel safe and get the resilience in the building that they need because the messaging was right, because they had one person or one relationship. Now, you might be wondering, what is the message for the kids? Because there are many messages that we can give kids. So I'm going to give you 4 essential, critical messages that I've given probably some of your kids in here. If you recognize me, hey, that I give kids, that I give my own kids, and that the research says we need to give kids. The first one is that adversity is not personal. Kids are egocentric. And what that means is everything that happens, they take it personal when they think that it's something that they did that caused it. So they need an adult to tell them, no, struggling is a part of life. It is not something that you did, and it is not because of the quality of the person in which who you are. They need us to change that message for them. The second thing, and you all might be surprised by this one, forgiveness. We need to teach kids forgiveness. Now, I could do a totally separate TED talk on forgiveness, but I won't. Or maybe I will. Who knows? I don't know. But forgiveness is huge. And I don't mean forgiveness as in we're teaching kids to be doormats and allow people to run over them. Absolutely not. When I say forgiveness, what I'm talking about is cutting the core of the burden of anger, resentment, hatred, fear, and self-loathing from our kids so that when it's time for them to be resilient, they don't have that knapsack hanging on their back. I've worked with those kids. It is hard to climb that mountain when you have stuff that you're carrying unnecessarily. But they don't know that. It's our job to give them that message. The third one is I see you. And I don't just see you physically, but I see your characteristics. I see that you matter. I see what you love. I see how you are. Let kids know that you see them. When you see them and they know you see them, they are more likely to overcome adversity because they know you care. And the fourth and last one is that it is okay to need other people. How many of you have ever heard somebody say, you're one of the strongest people I know? Well, let me tell you, that can feel like a backhanded compliment sometimes. Why? Because what that really means is I've seen you go through all this stuff and you don't seem to need people. Because that's how we as a society define strength, not needing people. And that is the literal antithesis of what we need to do to be resilient. We need to be okay with needing people. So we send that message to our kids early before they need people. And here's where I want to end. Research aside, stats aside, 15, 20 years, all that stuff aside, I can tell you, because what I didn't share in the beginning is that I could have been one of the other Westmores. I was exposed to violence and abuse at a very young age that no child should have to ever see or experience. I could have easily ended up being one of the kids who didn't beat the odds, and quite honestly, that's where I was meant to be, based on my childhood experience. But I had many adults that came along the way, but one foundational relationship and experience, and I'm not going to cry, that caused me to go from risk to resilience, and that was my sister, who at the ripe old age of 18, she adopted an 8-year-old girl because she decided that our story was going to end differently. Who at the age of 18 got a full-time job and an apartment and took a child in and said, we are going to figure it out. She told me to forgive my mother. She taught me it was okay to need other people. She saw me. She did everything right, even when she didn't have research and fancy letters back then, she does now, behind her name. She was caring, she was present, she was trustworthy. And that's what I needed. And what I'm telling you all today, the clarion call, is that all kids need you. Just like I needed her, they need you. So please, be the one that makes the difference for kids. Because the Westmores and the Teresse Lewises and fill in the blank of the world, oh, thank you.